Hey guys, what's up? Welcome to my kitchen. My name is Jess. I'm so glad to have you here with me in the kitchen today. Today I want to share a recipe that I think is the staple for any scratch cooking kitchen, and that is a very simple homemade biscuit. So if you live somewhere other than the southern United States, a biscuit may mean something very different to you. I know for some people that's what we call cookies or crackers or whatever. But here in the South, a biscuit is a fluffy, delicious bit of bread that can be served in a sweet sense with something like jam or jelly, or it can be served with savory stuff for dinner. It's very versatile, it's very easy, and the thing that I love about making biscuits from scratch is that it really doesn't take much forethought. It's something that you can pretty much whip out. You don't have to soften any butter, you don't have to plan ahead. It's just pulling stuff out of the fridge and throwing it together. So it's pretty common for me in my kitchen to make a batch of biscuits during the day, and then the kids can grab one for a snack when they get home from school. If we ever have any biscuits that are like threatening to go stale, that's a rare occurrence, I'll just slice them and put some sliced ham or cooked eggs inside of them and wrap them up and put them in the freezer, and then that can be quickly heated up or grabbed before school for a breakfast sandwich. And it's just that you're not going to go wrong cooking a pan of biscuits. So this is a very basic recipe. You can get fancy with biscuits, but you don't really have to, and so this is as simple as it gets. It's stuff that you likely already have in your fridge. First, we need to preheat the oven to 425 degrees, and I'm going to bake my biscuits in a cast iron pan. So I've got this nice and greased up and ready to go. You could do this in a baking dish. Technically, you could do this on a flat dish. I don't recommend that. I think that you're gonna get nice, softer, fluffier biscuits if you do something that has walls on the side, and that also you can put your biscuits somewhat close together. I like them to rise up together. If you like the crispy edges, then you could put it on like a flat cookie sheet and separate them out more, but you need to watch to make sure that you don't overcook them, because they are going to get harder faster having that much more of the dough exposed to the heat in the oven. Right here I've got 2.5 cups of all-purpose white flour. I've got some baking powder. I'm going to put 2 tablespoons of baking powder in this flour. This is aluminum-free baking powder. We go through a good bit of it, so I usually buy like the larger bags rather than just the little cans. 2 tablespoons. Next we have a teaspoon of salt. We measure salt with our heart in this house, so I'm just gonna round about that. All right, so I'm gonna mix my flour, baking powder, and salt together. And I will tell you that I normally throw this recipe together in a food processor. Today I'm going to do it without any extra equipment, just so that you guys can see how very simple this can be. The trick to doing biscuits is to have cold ingredient. Make sure that you don't get analysis paralysis on this. The worst thing that's going to happen if your ingredients aren't like ultra cold is that you're not going to have the optimum texture in your biscuit. So a great southern biscuit is fluffy and soft with a nice crispy outside layer, but good and like warm and soft on the inside. If by chance you don't have super cold ingredients or you do something wrong here, you'll still have something edible, especially if you're going to slather it with butter and jam. I mean, it's still good bread. The worst thing that's going to happen here is that you're going to have like a less than ideal texture, but it's not like you're not going to have an edible biscuit. So we're going to start with a stick of butter, or 1/2 cup of butter, cubed up in cubes. And this can come out of the fridge. You can, if you want. If you're really trying to like nail the texture of a biscuit, you can put this in the freezer once you've cubed it for like 15 minutes. Just don't forget it, so that it's good and cold. I'm not doing all that. So we're going to mix this in, and then I'm going to show you how we're going to work this. I usually use my hands if I'm not going to do this with a food processor, which I just crunch this butter up and flatten it. The best biscuits are made with love and with a mother's touch, isn't that right? So I don't want to work this butter with my hands a ton, because again, I'm not trying to make it really warm, but flattening it like this so you've got these little bits makes it a lot easier to incorporate. So this is just what I have always done when I'm not using other equipment. Now once I've broken down all of the big bits, I will go through and begin cutting this with these forks and just incorporating this butter and breaking it down further. And essentially what you want is you want it to be kind of crummy. You want your flour to have all these tiny little bits of butter mixed in. Excuse my pressure canner, it's going to get a little bit loud here behind us, but hopefully will not detract from the ability to follow this recipe. I'm sure it'll be fun. I believe you guys can pay attention. It'll be okay. So if you decide to use a food processor for this part of the process, just don't turn it on, use a pulse. So you put the butter in with a regular blade, and then just pulse it until it's nice and crummy and it's the right texture. The reason that I don't like to just turn it on and let it go is because friction, steady friction like that can add heat, and because we do want our ingredients to be nice and cold for the best texture, so we don't really want to warm them up a lot with a food processor. Pulsing it for 30 or 45 seconds is usually enough to really incorporate the butter nicely. Alright, so this is now broken down. Alright, so here's the texture I'm looking for. You can see my butter is, nicely broken down. There are a couple little chunks in it, but they're pretty thin. And overall, my flour kind of has this nice crumbly texture with the butter in it. Alright, now here's the real kicker for the best biscuit texture. The trick is buttermilk. The issue is, you're like, Jess, I thought you said that I would have everything in my fridge, and I don't have buttermilk in my fridge. I don't ever really keep buttermilk in my fridge. Now, we have dairy cows, so we always have raw milk, and sometimes we have raw milk that's starting to go sour, in which case I'll use that in place of buttermilk because it's going to kind of have that acidic tang to it. But a lot of times I do not have soured milk because we go through it so fast. So what I always have is jarred lemon juice. This comes in handy for so many reasons, and though I do keep fresh lemons throughout much of the year, they obviously do not grow locally to me. So buying jarred lemon juice and having that on hand is just, it makes it easier for things like this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a tablespoon of lemon juice in my measuring cup. This recipe calls for 1 cup plus 2 tablespoons of buttermilk. And I'm going to, you start by putting the tablespoon of lemon juice in your cup, and then you just measure the amount you need. It's about a tablespoon of lemon juice per cup of milk to make it buttermilky. Now, I'm just going to eyeball this. It doesn't have to be exact. I put about a tablespoon in. I put my cup plus 2 tablespoons of milk for the recipe. And if you were to let this sit on the counter for even just a few minutes, you would see a lot of separation. It's actually already started, look. Okay, so I don't know if you can see that just by putting this lemon juice into this milk, I'm already seeing a little bit of separation. You can see it along the wall here of the curds from the whey. This trick works with white vinegar as well if you do not have lemon juice in your fridge. But adding this acid to your milk is going to essentially create the flavor and the acidic texture and basically what the biscuit needs to be buttermilk biscuits. This works as a substitute. So I do not keep buttermilk simply because I used to buy it and then for a recipe, and then the rest of it would go bad because I didn't have a use for it. And now I always just do this. So I'm going to pour this in a little bit at a time, incorporating it. We don't want to overwork this dough, so just as soon as it starts soaking up, I'll add a little bit more. I'm going to get the flour mixed in without just working the dough too hard. So just a little tip, if you are working with any sort of dough and you mix it together and you think, oh, this is too wet or this is too dry, if it's just a slight discrepancy that you're like not sure that the texture is right, just wait a minute before you add anything to it. Like literally just set a timer for a minute and wait, because dough often needs just a little bit for the flour to absorb the moisture. And like this, whenever I was mixing it, I was thinking, oh, this is looking wet. I've made this recipe many times. Like I know that it's going to work. And so just letting it sit there for just a moment, it's now the exact right texture because it had the chance to absorb. So I'm going to scrape this all out. Now, if you have like a dough bowl scraper and all that stuff, I mean, you can use these here. But I'm trying to do this as simply as possible just because I think folks have been cooking biscuits like this in a kitchen with just a cast iron pan and mixing with their hands for a lot longer than I've been alive. So I'm going to start by pressing this into oh, I'm getting flour all over my camera, into a nice rectangle, pressing it out. And now what we want to do is fold it like this, which what this is going to do is create those nice layers in my biscuits. So I'm going to do this, and I'll just repeat that a few times. We're just pressing this out into a rectangle and then folding. If at any point you need to add a little bit more flour to your work surface to keep it from sticking, you can do that. That's another reason, like if your dough is just slightly on the wet side, if you're going to be folding and pressing it out like this, you don't want to add too much flour on the front end, because then when it soaks up this that's on the counter, it'll get too dry and they'll be tough. I want to get it to be about like between 1/2 and 3/4 of an inch here. And you'll notice there's still little bits of butter in here. That's nice. When these bake, that's going to melt. So here at this point, you can use a biscuit cutter if you've got one. If you don't, a mason jar lid works really nicely, or a mason jar itself. So I'm just going to cut these down here and put them in this pan, which is greased. Alright, when you get to the end and you have these scraps, just bring it together. We don't want to overwork this dough, but you can press it back out again a time or two without worrying about it. This is a 12-inch cast iron pan, and cut with this lid. It can hold all of them. You just kind of have to press them in there. So, if you cut them a little bit thicker, you should not have any left over. You should be able to just put together one last biscuit with the last scraps. Of course, when my camera's running, I don't quite nail it, but that's okay. Like I said, these may be a little bit thinner than they usually are, but it still is a biscuit. Like, even if it's not the ideal biscuit, it's still gonna be really good. All right, here at the end, I just heated up like 2 tablespoons of butter, and I'm literally just gonna drizzle this over the top of these, and then you can just use your hand and rub that. You could use a pastry brush here if you want to be more professional about it. But 425-degree oven, these are going in. I'm going to take a look at them at 18 minutes, and they should be about done. You want to see golden brown tops, and then you pull them out. Now, a bench scraper. This is a tool that is used in bread making. It's nice for actually cutting dough and stuff like that. It's also really good for scraping your counters off after you roll dough out. Alright guys, 18 minutes later, and these babies just came out of the oven looking lovely. Normally they're a little thicker. I usually do roll them out, not quite as thin, but even still, like I said, it might not be the ideal biscuit, but it'll still be very nice to eat. And if you look here, though they are kind of thin, it's got these nice layered flaky texture of the ideal southern biscuit. You can eat those with just some jam, some honey, butter. You can put gravy on them for biscuits and gravy, which is definitely a southern thing. Slice them in half and make a sandwich out of them. Like I said, you can fill them with like ham and eggs, wrap them up and put them in the freezer, and then heat them up for a pre-made breakfast sandwich. Overall, you can't go wrong with a biscuit. I will put a link to the printable PDF of this recipe in the notes down below. So go ahead and print that out and put it in your recipe binder. Thank you guys for hanging out with me in my kitchen today. I bless you. Until next time.